I'm Professor of Criminology and Criminal Justice at the University of Salford, and I'm also a member of the Youth Justice Board for England and Wales. Most of my career, I've been looking at children and young adults who are going through the criminal justice system, or indeed those who support children who go through the criminal justice system, youth justice professionals, the courts, police officers. My career researching youth justice actually started with the evaluation of Medway Secure Training Centre. And one of the things we worked out very quickly was that things that were done with kids inside the custodial institution alone didn't make any difference to what happened when they got out. It was only the way that the children were prepared for release and the working between those inside and the support workers outside the custodial institution and how quickly they got them ready, the kids ready for that. That's what made the difference. And that's what we've begun to call resettlement. The Chief Inspector of Probation in 2015-2016 described both the practice and the outcomes for kids coming through custody and being resettled as shocking, really shocking. And he posed the question, he said, well, why is that the case? We've got all these statistical associations showing what's needed at what time, and yet these things don't seem to be being done. Why are they not being done? Why are kids' outcomes the poorest of any kids in youth justice, kids coming out of custody? Why? That's the big question. And it's been a long-standing issue for youth justice over the last 20 years or so. So I was involved with a research project called Beyond Youth Custody that really tried to find the answer to that problem of why were outcomes and practice in relation to resettlement, kids coming out of custody, why was the support so poor when we knew all the statistical associations between what needed to be done and the effects? And what we found was that professionals were putting lots of effort into resettlement. They were putting things in place for kids to do when they left custody, but they weren't necessarily the right things. It wasn't necessarily the right education, the right training, the right accommodation to suit their needs. But why was that? Why were professionals not doing that? They were certainly putting in the effort. And what we found was that there was a lack of understanding about how each of those elements, accommodation, education, other elements of preparation for release, fitted in with the whole, would actually add up to preventing offending. Yes, we knew the long-term aim was preventing offending, and we knew that these individual elements, but they were so decontextualized, you couldn't see how one would lead to the other. What was missing was a theory of change, an understanding of why what we are doing makes a difference in the long run, and therefore our place as professionals, youth justice professionals, our place in that process for a child. We very early realized that we'd been thinking about resettlement in entirely the wrong way. We'd been thinking of it as a transition point between custody and community, and it's not for the child. For the child, it's a journey. When resettlement works, they go on a journey, and it's a personal journey. It's not a sentence journey. It's a personal journey of development for the child. And it's not a linear journey that starts off with somebody in trouble and then they go through a series of sort of hurdles and it comes out great at the other end. No, it's less like that sort of Monopoly board and more like a game of snakes and ladders where you can take 2 steps forward and 1 back, or even 1 step forward and 2 back, and then you have to pick yourself up again. And workers need to support the child through that journey. So what happened when resettlement was successful? And what we realized is that the child's journey has been one where they've managed somehow to shift the way they think about themselves and their place in the world from one that's conducive to offending to a sort of a pro-social way of thinking about themselves, thinking themselves positively in a way that would lead to a contribution, a positive contribution to society. It's a shift from a pro-offending identity to a pro-social identity. Now, That pro-offending identity may not be thinking of yourself as an offender, although it could be, but it could be thinking of yourself in a way that allows offending, like I'm a hard man, or I'm a street kid, or I'm a fighter, or I'm kind of a tough person, or I'm a wheeler dealer, or I'm a gang member. It's some way that they think about themselves and their place, their position in the world that has allowed offending. When resettlement works, there's a process that goes on that enables them to shift, to develop the way they think about themselves to a much more pro-social identity. So if effective resettlement is where a child shifts the way they think of themselves from being pro-offending to pro-social, then what should be the aim for everyone working with a child through this process? Well, it's got to be surely to help them, to facilitate that shift in identity, that way of thinking of themselves and their place in the world, from being conducive to offending to being conducive to positive contributions in society, and therefore away from an identity that would lead to offending. We adapted the Beyond Youth Custody findings into a framework to help policymakers and practitioners. And the Youth Justice Board turned that into a policy guidance called constructive resettlement. One of the findings from an earlier evaluation of resettlement, the evaluation of the Northwest Resettlement Consortium, which was really effective, found that it was so effective because information was being shared very well. So there were regular meetings, there was regular exchange of information, and whenever there was a problem with helping a child move forward, maybe there was a block practically that was within the gift of one of the agencies or another agency, or we had to look elsewhere, then there was a lot of talk, a lot of discussion and sharing of the information that could help unblock that problem. You're not going to do that unless you talk, unless you share information. Well, every agency needs to recognize that if helping a child develop their identity is what makes a difference in the long run, then that has to be our focus. That has to be our aim. We need to look within ourselves as agencies and together, the way we work together as agencies collaboratively, to look at all our policies, all our procedures, and are they undermining or are they underlining a identity shift for children? Now, at the policy level, the importance of constructive resettlement has been well and truly recognised. So from the How to Make Resettlement Constructive document that the YJB published in 2018, these ideas about pro-social identity development are at the heart of the national standards, Ministry of Justice and Youth Justice national standards from 2019 onwards. They state that youth offending teams and secure establishments need to provide a tailored plan for children that should set out the personal and structural support to be made available to support the child develop a pro-social identity. Those are the exact words in the national standards that we should all be abiding by. Also, HMI prisons, for instance, their expectation number 71 is that institutions should similarly explore pro-social strengths and goals. And the HMI probation has also recently introduced a new standard for resettlement that really has constructive resettlement at the heart of it. It says the word constructive so many times, and if you look at the guidance, it's very clear. It's about developing pro-social identity and putting the support in, all agencies putting the support in to support children to help develop the way they see themselves and their place in the world. So we really do need to reflect on all our policies and practices and procedures to ask the question of ourselves, are they underlining and helping the child to develop their identity, to look to the future, to think pro-socially about themselves and their place in the world? Or are they undermining that? Are they reminding the child that they are an offender, that they have risks, that they are trouble? Look at the meetings we have with children. Look at the paperwork we use in those meetings. Look at the way we respond when a child maybe does something wrong in their journey. And the Youth Custody Service has adopted constructive resettlement as its theory of change in order for all its employees, all its sites, all its institutions to understand effective custody and resettlement. And the role and purpose of everybody involved in the Youth Custody Service is to help a child develop their identity, help them shift their identity from pro-offending to pro-social, and all the preparation from release, right from when they go into custody, right from to beyond release, to beyond the end of their community part of their sentence, should all be focused on how to help the child continue to develop their identity, to be pro-social and to be conducive to making positive outcomes and a positive contribution to society. For years and years, decades and decades, we were focused on managing the risk of children offending. It was a really deficit way of looking at things and almost presented children as a bunch of risk factors. Well, in recent years, we've got a much clearer understanding of how children can develop positively, how we can work towards children's positive outcomes, both inside custody and more generally in youth justice as children. And that's going to make our community safer. It's going to produce fewer victims. So we need to make sure that we really grasp that new knowledge around resettlement, around constructive resettlement, and drive it forward to improve our practice, improve outcomes for children and the wider community. Now's the time to move forward on this.